In January 1941, Charles Sorenson stood beneath the bright California sun at Consolidated Aircraft's San Diego facility, watching with growing disbelief as workers attempted to assemble B-24 Liberator bombers outdoors under conditions that made his teeth clench with frustration. For Sorenson, Ford Motor Company's 60-year-old production chief, a Danish immigrant hardened by decades of industrial struggle since he first walked into Henry Ford's shop in 1905 earning $3 a day, was the man who had built the moving assembly line that changed the world, and no one alive understood mass production better than he did. Standing beside him was Edsel Ford, the 45-year-old company president and sole son of Henry Ford, and together they had flown from Detroit to see how Consolidated was building the bomber the Army Air Corps desperately needed, but what Sorenson saw made him want to leave immediately. Bombers were being assembled in the open air, their wings and engines fitted using improvised rigs while the California heat warped metal parts, and because nothing was standardized, every airframe required endless fitting and refitting, since no two components were exactly alike. Consolidated had been under contract for months yet had completed only 7 aircraft and delivered 3, while Europe was on fire, France fallen, Britain bombed nightly, and President Roosevelt had demanded American industry produce 50,000 combat aircraft to confront the coming global storm, a number greater than every plane built in the United States since Kitty Hawk. And here stood Consolidated, unable to build 8 bombers in 6 months. The Army had brought Ford into the program hoping the auto giant could produce sub-assemblies to ship west for final assembly, the traditional procurement approach, but as Sorenson watched men struggle to attach wings that didn't quite fit to fuselages warped by the sun, he knew the system would never work. The B-24 was massive and complex, 67 feet long, a wingspan of 110 feet, 4 engines, 10 crewmen, and 1.5 million individual parts, compared to the 15,000 that made up a Ford car, and aviation experts insisted aircraft could never be built like automobiles because the tolerances were too tight and the precision too demanding. But Sorenson saw what they couldn't. Beneath the complexity, the bomber faced the same fundamental manufacturing problem he had solved decades earlier. Move the product, not the workers, standardize parts, build sub-assemblies that feed a main line, master the logistics, and scale the output. That night in his hotel room, unable to sleep, he covered sheets of stationery and pencil sketches, breaking the B-24 into major assemblies: fuselage, wings, tail, landing gear, engines, and then into 69 sub-assemblies, each built on its own line and fed at the precise moment into a mile-long, twin-line assembly plant running continuously, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At breakfast he showed Edsel the sketches and declared Ford could build 1 bomber per hour, an idea so outrageous it bordered on madness, considering Consolidated took weeks to build 1 aircraft. But Edsel looked at the drawing, looked at Sorenson, and said Ford would build the plant. When they presented the plan to Consolidated that afternoon, aviation engineers dismissed it as impossible. Aircraft weren't cars, tolerances were too fine, specifications too variable, and mass production would never work. When Sorenson asked how they would do it, they had no answer beyond the slow, inefficient, craft-based approach they had always used. So he told them Ford would not merely build parts, they would build complete bombers, at automotive rates. The meeting ended in hostility, Consolidated filing memos calling Sorenson arrogant and ignorant of aviation, unaware that by the time Sorenson returned to Michigan, Ford was already committed to the largest manufacturing gamble in American history. The cost of slow production was measured in lost time and delayed strategy. In 1941-42, U.S. bomber production lagged so badly that squadrons trained with obsolete aircraft, combat units deployed under strength, and the strategic bombing campaign could not begin. Germany's industrial machine was running at full speed while the U.S. built under 2,000 heavy bombers in 1941, and General Henry Arnold warned that at this pace, America wouldn't have sufficient bombers until 1944, by which time the war might already be lost. Meanwhile, in Michigan, construction crews were ripping apart Henry Ford's farmland near Ypsilanti, once Camp Willow Run, where boys from Gold Star families had lived in tents, worked fields at dawn, and been shaped by Henry Ford's belief that labor built character. Now bulldozers were leveling the land for a factory Henry Ford himself hated. At 77, increasingly erratic, stubbornly isolationist, and opposed to American entry into another European war, he initially refused military contracts and cancelled foreign engine orders, but Edsel convinced him this was different, defense of America, and Sorenson persuaded him the engineering challenge was irresistible, especially since every expert predicted Ford would fail. Architect Albert Kahn designed what he called the most enormous room in human history, an L-shaped structure 3,200 feet long and 1,279 feet across, covering 80 acres of uninterrupted floor space, larger than the Empire State Building. Its shape dictated, legend said, by Henry's insistence that the plant not extend into heavily unionized Wayne County. The kink required the assembly line to turn 90 degrees, a problem Sorenson solved with giant turntables. Construction began April 18, 1941. Contractors worked simultaneously. Finished areas were walled off from those still under construction. Equipment was installed even as workers poured concrete. The first sections opened in September 1941, 3 months before Pearl Harbor, and what followed was 20 months of chaos. Aviation experts had been right about one thing. Building bombers was not like building cars. Consolidated retained design authority, and so did the Army, and Ford could not modify anything. Consolidated phoned daily, sometimes hourly, with design changes. Sorenson sent 70 Ford engineers to San Diego and discovered the B-24 drawings were incomplete, contradictory, and filled with tribal knowledge held only in foreman's memories. Sorenson had 2 Liberators flown to Dearborn, disassembled them piece by piece, and set 200 engineers working around the clock to redraft the aircraft, producing 5 miles of drawings per day, yet 10,000 drawings became obsolete immediately as Consolidated kept altering the design. The B-24A became the C, then the D, then the E, new turrets, new gun positions, new control systems, and every change disrupted Ford's line. The worst came when the Army insisted on a nose turret, requiring a complete redesign of the forward fuselage, months of retooling, retraining, and delays. The first Willow Run bomber took 10 months to build and rolled out October 1, 1942, christened Spirit of Ypsilanti, 5 months late, while newspapers mocked the plant as Will It Run? The factory was failing. Only 56 complete bombers were built in 1942, and most were finished elsewhere from Ford sub-assemblies. Workers could not reach the remote plant, rationing limited gasoline and tires, rural roads jammed with thousands of cars, turnover exceeded hiring, workers quit after a week, winter cold froze tools to bare skin, summer heat reached 100 degrees, absenteeism hit 30%, workers slept in cars or shared beds in shifts, landlords charged triple rent. Eventually the government built massive housing projects. Willow Run Lodge with 1,900 rooms, Willow Run Village for 2,500 families, trailer parks with 1,000 units, West Lodge Dormitory, and Parkridge for African American workers, segregated despite similar workforce percentages. Problems escalated so dramatically that Senator Harry Truman's investigation committee came in 1942 to consider nationalizing Ford. Edsel personally walked Truman through the records showing Consolidated's constant design disruptions, and while Truman scolded Ford for delays, the final report cleared them, recommended one-man authority over the program, and demanded design stabilization. Production rose, 37 bombers in January 1943, 70 in February, 96 in March, 146 in April. Slow but unmistakable improvement. The workforce stabilized as housing opened, absenteeism dropped, skilled workers finally stayed long enough to become experts. Ford engineers refined the line endlessly, saving seconds that compounded into hours and days of throughput. And all the while Edsel Ford, secretly dying, kept pushing. Suffering from inoperable cancer discovered in January 1942, enduring radiation and agony, he still attended meetings, reviewed reports from hospital beds, and insisted on fulfilling the promise of 1 bomber per hour. The stress accelerated his decline. Henry Ford denied the severity, insisted rest or chiropractic care would cure his son. Edsel's wife Eleanor knew better and later said Willow Run had killed him. On May 26, 1943, at 1:10 a.m., Edsel Ford died at 49. The workforce shut down for his funeral. Thousands lined the streets. Henry Ford, grief-stricken and mentally declining, resumed the presidency 6 days later, terrifying the government, until Eleanor and Clara Ford persuaded him to relinquish control. Edsel's son, Henry Ford II, was pulled from Navy service to run the company at 28, with the production side, Sorenson and team, being the only functioning arm of the company. Meanwhile, Willow Run began achieving the impossible. The greatest breakthrough came from permanent steel jigs. Consolidated built center wings using disposable wooden jigs requiring 250 man-hours each. Ford built precision steel jigs that lasted indefinitely, reduced setup time from 250 hours to 1, standardized production, and turned the slowest bottleneck into the fastest section. Permanent jigs spread across the factory. By November 3, 1943, Willow Run celebrated its 1,000th bomber, though Edsel did not live to see it. Leadership shifted from Sorenson to Meade Bricker as the government decentralized operations. Subassemblies moved elsewhere. Willow Run focused on final assembly. Design changes finally stopped. Workers became skilled, and women entered the workforce in massive numbers. By May 1942, 15% of workers were women. By 1944, thousands served as riveters, welders, mechanics, electricians, and inspectors. They earned equal pay for equal work at Ford, rare in wartime industry, and became symbols of the home front, including Rose Monroe, often associated with Rosie the Riveter. Women performed precision tasks whose failure could kill air crews, many of whom were their own husbands, brothers, or sons. Production accelerated beyond all expectations. By 1944, Willow Run delivered 1 bomber every 63 minutes, 24 hours a day. In April 1944 alone, the plant completed 453 bombers. Between April 24 to 26, 100 aircraft flew away, 33 in 48 hours. Germany felt the impact immediately. The Luftwaffe, once confident, now faced endless waves of American bombers replaced faster than they could be shot down. Combat groups, the 44th, 93rd, 98th, 376th, and 15th Air Force units, relied heavily on Willow Run B-24s. In the Atlantic, very long-range Liberators closed the mid-Atlantic gap, hunting U-boats that once operated with impunity. In Europe, giant formations of B-24s bombed German oil, rail, and industrial targets, crippling the enemy. In the Pacific, the B-24's long range proved indispensable. And behind it all stood mass production, Sorenson's triumph, showing America could win wars through industrial scale. Sorenson retired in March 1944, just as Willow Run hit peak production, later leading Willis Overland before retiring fully in 1950. He died in 1968 at 86. Willow Run's final bomber rolled out June 28, 1945, named the Henry Ford, and total production reached 6,792 complete aircraft plus 1,893 knockdown kits, for 8,685 total. More than half of all B-24s ever built came from one factory in Michigan. After the war, Willow Run passed to Kaiser Frazer, then General Motors. Most of it was demolished except the final assembly bay, preserved today by the Yankee Air Museum. Visitors can stand where aviation experts once said mass production was impossible, where Sorenson's Midnight Sketch became a factory that reshaped warfare, where Edsel Ford gave his life to keep a promise, where women proved their capabilities, and where America learned that overwhelming industrial capacity could defeat any enemy. Willow Run's legacy is not just the bombers, but the lesson: conventional wisdom fails, innovation requires defiance, and mass production, applied boldly, can change the world.